I saw the poll numbers early this morning. They were putting them up on the screen on the Fox News channel. I happened to look up at the monitor and see that Trump's poll numbers are about the same as they were last month, which is he's down from 33% to 32% nationally, but he's still got a 10-point lead nationally over Ben Carson. And Trump's poll numbers against various Democrats as they try to game who'd be better as a nominee against the other, the other party. He's doing better. I mean, he was trailing Hillary Clinton for a long, long time, but a lot closer now in that situation. And there are still people out there who say, you know what, we got to get rid of him. The Republican Party is trying to move this guy out of the way because they say, well, he's not really a conservative, and I suppose in a great many areas he's not. His argument is, I'm a problem solver. And that's been what he's been saying all along. I'm a problem solver. I don't think he identifies. He may say he's conservative on some issues, but I think his point is, you got a country circling the drain. You need a problem solver. And so he's attracting a lot of people. I don't know how he does with Democrats, maybe not well at all, because they already have their queen in place, or they think they do, unless she's in prison by Election Day. Yet, here's this guy, Trump. He's also polling well among independents, which somewhat of a surprise to me as well. And I think the people who are supporting him in the Republican Party are those people who have a strong independent streak themselves. Charles Hurt, writing at the Washington Times, says, just last month, Republican Party officials scurried into Trump Tower to extract a loyalty pledge from a certain unpredictable billionaire real estate mogul turned presidential candidate. And then he writes, who knew it should have been Donald Trump extracting just such a loyalty pledge from the Republican bigwigs? Because he cites a story by Byron York over at the Washington Examiner. York says he talked to one of the nation's leading conservatives. He won't tell you who it is, but this is apparently some big power player in Washington who said if Trump is the nominee, you will see, quote, massive resistance, unquote. That means from Republican establishment. Trump, on the other hand, with his fortune of $9 or $10 billion, he says it's 10. Media variously reports it at 9. When you're worth that many billions of dollars, does it really matter? And I remember a candidate running for U.S. Congress one time that I was covering who was quite wealthy, and when someone actually asked him at a campaign event, what's your net worth? He said, I don't know today. And he got booed by the crowd, and he said, no, hold on a minute. He says, I have my money tied up in a great many investments. He said, I'd have to go figure out, I'd have to ask my advisor what I have today, because if it was a bad day on the markets, I lost some money. If it was a really good day on the markets, I'm a lot wealthier tonight than I was, let's say, before I even shaved this morning. So keep that into account that Trump has a lot of money of his own he could throw back at the Republican establishment if they decide to come at him with their big, they've got big pockets obviously as well. But the writer says it is precisely this level of stupidity, and he's referring to the establishment, of an inability to speak clearly or market ideas effectively that has created such a vast tundra of talentless mopes into which Mr. Trump wades so effortlessly and immediately takes total command. Yeah, there are a lot of, we were told it was a great Republican field this year, and yet a lot of them it's same old, same old. And when Trump would say something that they thought was outlandish, they would all do whatever the mainstream media wanted them to do. They would say, he needs to issue an apology and then withdraw from the race. Because that's what they would do. But he defies that. He says, no, I'm not going to do it. And people say, yeah, dang straight. And then they turn around and say, well, the base must be stupid. That's, in fact, if you read Eric Erickson, who's sometimes fill-in for Rush Limbaugh, he's a talk show host out of WSB in Atlanta, Georgia, and I read his work every day. He is not a Trump fan. He is the guy who disinvited Trump from the Red State gathering. He says you've got too many leading Republicans saying that it's talk radio really is promoting Trump. But he says talk radio is even more relational than radio in general. He says, I do not want to be presumed to be speaking for any host other than myself, but I can tell you from experience that radio hosts reflect their listeners and give voice to their listeners and are in a friendship with their listeners. And it's the listeners in many cases, 1/3 of them, who are backing Donald Trump. And, but the notion is, he says, instead of trying to attack the conservative base or whoever it is that is supporting Trump, the leadership in Washington, they'll attack the talk radio show hosts instead. because that way they can't publicly insult the people that they don't really like. And that means the 32% who are supporting Donald Trump. And he writes, essentially the blame is that the conservative grassroots are stupid, but instead of saying it that directly, the D.C. crowd says the grassroots are being led, being conned, or being lied to. In other words, I've heard this so many times. Rush Limbaugh shared the clip the other day of a guy who'd called into C-SPAN and was talking about how Rush Limbaugh had brainwashed, more than half of America, or roughly half of America. How does it go about doing that when only 1 in 10 radios, pretty much, if you look all over the country, only about 10% of the radios that are turned on from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock our time. But while he's on the air live, only 1 in 10 radios in the country are actually tuned to Rush Limbaugh. That means 90% of the radios that are on are not listening to Rush Limbaugh. And how many people are not listening to radio during those 3 hours because so many people at work can't listen to radio? So then it's actually less than 1/10 of the population. So you may be talking 3% of the population is actually listening to Rush Limbaugh for the full 3 hours of his program every day. See, when Rush says there's 20 million listeners every week, that doesn't mean that they're all with their ears up to the radio for the 3 full hours every day. It means that some people have to tune in and out. So it's the aggregate, the 20 million. So to sit there and say that 50% of America believes one thing because Rush has been somehow sending subliminal messages over the radio to them, it's just more liberal, socialist propaganda that you hear, because they look in the mirror and they go, gee, isn't liberalism and socialism, aren't these things self-evident truths? Gee willikers, if the rest of the country doesn't believe it, they must be dumber than I am. And I is a clever liberal, so I is really smart. And therefore, that means everybody else is a dumb dummy. We've got more coming up. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Maybe a phone call or two would be necessary on this topic. Hey, did you know that there's more news today? It's about every day there's more news about the collapse of Obamacare's healthcare exchanges in the various states where they were set up, about half the states around the country. Speaking of your health, we've been telling people over the last few weeks that your hearing health, very, very important. Obviously, you don't want to be left out of conversations and social activities. And in order to maintain that, you might want to have someone do a screening. If they find a problem, they can help you at least with some sort of aid or clear up the problem that may be causing that hearing loss. We recommend Dr. Christine Pickup, a doctor of audiology at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert, Idaho, 1218 9th Street, unit number 2. You can find them online at mountharrisonaudiology.com. And if you'd like to give her a phone call, the telephone number at the office, 208-312-0957. Hearing loss and dementia are linked. Hearing loss becomes a great burden on the brain as you have to expend more time and energy to decipher what others are saying to you. Treating hearing loss reduces the strain and makes hearing more natural. You can keep your brain healthy by taking care of your hearing. 944, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 43, and if you'd like to reach our program today, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. I was telling you, there are so many problems in this country today. No wonder people are looking for alternatives. And the one that really has been coming to light the last several days, for months and months and months, I have been reading all of these leftist newspaper columnists telling us that Obamacare is a smashing success, except it's not. Daily Signal has a couple of pieces today. They've really been following this closely. Daily Signal is the daily mouthpiece of the Heritage Foundation. Melissa Quinn writing, nearly 2 years into its implementation, the White House is projecting 10 million fewer Obamacare enrollees in 2016 than were originally expected. You may be thinking, well, okay, 10 million out of a population of 330 million, what's the big deal? Well, we'll get there in a moment. Last week, the Department of Health announced it expects roughly 10.4 million Americans to have health insurance coverage in 2016 through Obamacare. The estimate is a modest increase from 9.1 million that the department projected signed up during this year's enrollment period. In March, this was just this year, in March, the agency estimated that 21 million people would have coverage under Obamacare by the end of the year. So it's less than half. It's less than half. And those people who have it are mainly older and have other conditions, medical conditions, which means the younger folks who don't get sick that often aren't paying in, And that was supposed to be the deal. The younger people would pay in and not get sick very often, and that would cover the costs of the program. Oops. Maybe that explains why 6 of these 23 health exchanges across the country have already gone belly up, and another 11 more may be on the edge. And then the very same publication has this story from Drew Goncharowski. States that accepted Obamacare expansions have had Medicaid enrollment increase 18%, and total Medicaid spending grow 17.7%. A recent report from the Kaiser Family Foundation has shown. Kaiser Family Foundation is not a conservative outfit. It's nonpartisan. Alternatively, states that chose not to expand under Obamacare had Medicaid enrollment increase just 5.1%, and total spending only grew 6.1%. Now, media had reported this the other way around, but media could have been, how shall we put it, a little bit more diligent or more ambitious, perhaps. He said what tripped up these reporters were figures in the study that related to state government's share of total spending. Kaiser found that state spending on Medicaid increased 3.4% in expansion states, but 6.9% in non-expansion states. However, state spending on Medicaid appeared to decrease because the federal government is temporarily picking up the tab in the expansion states. That money is going to go away, and that means that the states then who've expanded their programs won't have the federal government handing them cash anymore, and will have to go to their taxpayers, state taxpayers, and say, please fill the bucket. That was not part of the promise or the bargain, was it? And he says the impact of that funding reduction on expansion states' budgets will be magnified because it will apply to a larger share of those states' now much bigger Medicaid populations. Why is it that the liberals who foisted this upon us couldn't foresee that? They had so many alarms going off. So many people were warning them, saying, look, you had so many people, economists especially, coming forward and saying, this ain't going to work, folks. And yet, they knew it wasn't going to work. Bernie Sanders said on stage at that debate last week that we haven't gone far enough. And then he went on television the other day on a TV program over the weekend, and you know what he said? It would be cheaper to have the nationalized health care system, the single-payer system. Well, right now, with this system running out of cash and wheezing as it goes along, clearly it's true it's going to cost much more money than we were told it was going to cost 5 years ago when it was adopted. So Sanders' solution is, tell you what, we'll create an even bigger system, susceptible to fraud and all of those other issues, so people could walk away with even more money from the federal treasury. So he's going around, not an economist, by the way, by any means. He's going around he's a granola-chomping liberal from Vermont, let's be honest. Well, a socialist from Vermont. He's going around the country saying, oh, everything's going to be better if you just make the program bigger and spend even more money. Oh, but it'll be cheaper, even though we make it bigger and spend more money. That is Bernie Sanders' logic. Hillary Clinton likely agrees with that. I think that this whole thing was designed to fail. Because then when it failed, they could turn around and say, well, we're just going to have to go to a government-run healthcare system, and everything will be free. Well, you're telling me the doctors are going to work for free? Sure. You're telling me the hospitals will be able to run without heating and cooling and maintenance and lawn mowing, and you don't have to pay for the kitchen service and the like and the cleaning staff? Sure. Yes, it'll all be free. And of course, just out of the goodness of their own hearts, the pharmaceuticals will give away the drugs. Sure. Or they'll force them to do it. Mike Gallagher is up next, brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. The telephone number is 736-6563. And in just a few moments, we wrap up today's edition of the program. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com. That means you can listen to us online anywhere, all over the world. And God willing, the creek don't rise. I get to do this all over again tomorrow. Rebecca Milsoika will be in studio with us tomorrow. She's a candidate, of course, running for re-election to the Twin Falls City Council. We have a handful of candidates who are still coming in, time running out. Let me just put it that way. And it's a 2-hour show, and at the very end, if there's a rush, I'm sorry, but we wouldn't have a possibility of getting everybody in at the last minute. It's also not fair if they drop bombs on the other candidates at the last minute, and nobody has an opportunity to respond in that situation. 9:55:43. Before we wrap up the show today, I do want to remind you, we have been telling you for months about the folks at Tint Lady. And we've been telling you about how putting window tints in your home office, or your automobile can actually cut down on that heat that comes through on those very hot days. So we don't have a lot of hot days going on right now, but we want to remind you that sunlight, even in winter, beating through the windows, that UV, that is fading your carpets, your furniture, your drapes, and it may even damage the photographs you have hanging on the walls. Very valuable things for a lot of people. Need a free estimate? They'll come out and they'll do one. The folks from Tint Lady will come out, do a free estimate, and in fact, many of the window tints you put in will eventually pay for themselves, and probably not in a very long time either, very quickly. So you can give them a call at 736-8469 or go online at tintladyidaho.com. Locally owned and operated, more than 20 years in the business. 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls, open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Saturday by appointment only, closed on Sundays. And remember, don't squint, get tint. 2 stories I got to share with you before we wrap up today because it was somewhat of a busy show. These are things that did deserve probably a lot more time than I will be giving them in the last couple of minutes. I happened to see a story and I was disgusted when I saw it last night. And then I saw a second story that even made me more disgusted. Time magazine reporting, University of Mississippi has long struggled over whether it can keep a long-held campus-wide symbols of the Confederacy while making the university a welcoming place for students of color. In other words, can we wipe away past history? Now the Student Senate has voted to remove the state's flag from the campus. Yes, Old Miss, and it's supposed not to be called Old Miss either because apparently liberals now say Old Miss is a derogatory term for, the woman on the syrup bottle. Who knew? Now they'd like to remove the flag, and they're going ahead and they're telling the campus, the college, they're recommending the state flag be removed because in one corner of it, there's an old Confederate battle flag, which, of course, is because it's Mississippi's history, and they're showing that. I read that and I thought, when does this come to an end? How do we stop liberals from just going out and destroying everything? And, the Taliban do that. They go into a place and they destroy all of the old religious icons from other religious faiths to pretend it never happened and it was never there. How that stops anything, I don't know. Secondly, then I read this other story that was even more disturbing. The American Legion in a small Iowa town has for many years on Veterans Day gone out to the local high school, and you know what they do? They have a Veterans Day ceremony, and then they fire a 21-gun salute. Usually some local Marines come in from one of the local reserve centers, and they take care of that. There's actually a photograph of Marines doing it that accompanies it. The school has now decided, the school has gone forward, get this, and said they are canceling the Veterans Day event. Why? Because there are guns involved with a 21-gun salute. And they don't want the students exposed to somebody shooting a gun off. Because, then you know what'll happen. The students will all go, I'm going to run out and shoot up the school. When is someone going to grab these liberals by their lapels and give them the violent shaking they apparently need so that they might finally get some common sense back? And the elevator again will return to the top floor. Rush Limbaugh is coming up next following news. Right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.